Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Catherine Soville. I am a registered dietitian, and today I will be discussing public health in relation to safe methods of food service and food safety. So the goals and objectives of today's presentation will be to go over the FDA food code in relation to basic public health food protection and hygiene practices, the safe methods of food service, and food safety, such as thawing, cooking, cooling, handling, holding, and the storing of food items. In addition, the second presentation will go over proper cleaning and sanitization methods and proper insect and vermin control. Public health and consumer expectations. So it is the shared responsibility of the food industry and the government to ensure that food provided to the consumers is safe and does not become a vehicle in a disease outbreak or the transmission of communicable diseases. This is a shared responsibility to extend to ensuring that consumers' expectations are met and that the food is unadulterated, prepared in a clean environment, and honestly presented. The food code provides a system of prevention and overlapping safeguards designed to minimize foodborne illness, ensure employee health, industry manager knowledge, safe food, non-toxic and cleanable equipment, and levels of sanitization on food establishment premises, and promote the fair dealings with the consumer. So why is food safety important? Well, 1 in 6 Americans will get foodborne illness every year, or that is a total of 48 million illnesses per year. That includes 128,000 hospitalizations and 3,000 deaths according to the CDC. So this is a large amount of people that do suffer from foodborne illnesses, so it is our responsibility to make sure that we are doing everything in our power to minimize this risk. The symptoms of foodborne illness include nausea, vomiting, cramps, diarrhea, sore throat, and then it can also lead to the infection of burns and cuts. The incubation time can vary from a few short hours to a few weeks. And the big 6 or most common foodborne illnesses are Shigella, Salmonella, non-typhoid Salmonella, Shigatoxin-producing E. coli, hepatitis A, and norovirus. And the 5 major risk factors related to employee behaviors and preparation practices are the improper holding food temperatures, inadequate cooking such as undercooking raw shell eggs or other foods such as raw meats, contaminated equipment, food from unsafe sources, so food that has come in, that is ordered that is unsafe, and our own personal hygiene. So getting more into these hazards, poor personal hygiene is a major risk factor. So an infectious individual, such as someone who is capable of transmitting an infection or communicable disease, are the source of contamination such as norovirus or influenza. So an individual who has either of these diseases or any of the illnesses described and they are dealing with food and food contact can easily transmit these viruses to the food and then thus contaminate a resident. So it is important that proper hand washing is also a good technique to reduce contamination of food and prevent the cross-contamination from your hands onto the food. And then if an individual is infected, they are to not be involved in the handling of food. This is a very critical prevention for foodborne illness. Inadequate cooking and improper holding temperatures of food. So cook that is not cooked thoroughly or it is not held at the appropriate temperatures can promote the growth of pathogens that cause foodborne illness. And we will get into more of these details about the proper temperatures and holding times of food. But it's very important that food is not held or cooked at these temperatures that could promote the growth of pathogens and then, infect an individual. And lastly, we have contaminated equipment. So equipment in the kitchen can be contaminated in many ways, such as, of poor personal hygiene. So if your hands are dirty and you're touching food or touching the equipment, then this can, carry on to the food and infect an individual. Improper sanitization, so not having the proper equipment being sanitized correctly can produce cross-contamination and thus, again, infecting an individual. And the contact with raw food, so poultry, eggs, and meat that are raw that carry these bacteria or viruses can then be transmitted to individuals. There are 5 key public health interventions to protect consumers' health. The first one is the demonstration of knowledge. So, me going over this information with you and you understanding what is being presented to you. Employee controls. So again, hand washing, proper hygiene. Those are all things that you can control to prevent a consumer's health. And controlling contamination, like I've gone over, separating raw foods and from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables, preventing cross-contamination from, not sanitizing equipment or utensils properly, and time and temperature parameters, so cooking food to their proper cooking temperatures to prevent or kill any bacteria or pathogens, and then consumer advisory. So here's a little picture. Some of the 4 things that are really important for preventing bacteria and keeping food safe. So again, cleaning your hands, services often to prevent contamination, separating raw meats from vegetables. So we have raw meats on one cutting board and fresh fruits and vegetables on another cutting board. We do not want to contaminate, the bacteria from potentially that is in the raw meat to ready-to-eat fruits and vegetables. And then cooking, so proper cooking temperatures to ensure the bacteria and viruses are killed during cooking, and then properly chilling and keeping foods cold at the correct temperatures. All of these things will help prevent food from contaminating residents or any other consumers. So there are 3 main sources of contamination: biological, physical, and chemical sources. Biological is the pathogenic bacteria, viruses, toxins, and spores that contaminate food. So in raw foods, chicken, eggs, these can sometimes carry viruses or salmonella. And if they are not cooked properly or they become contaminated onto other, fresh fruits and vegetables, then if an individual consumes these foods, then they can potentially get a foodborne illness. Physical contamination in the food, such as pieces of glass, metal shavings, staples, bandages, jewelry, fake nails, etc. All of these things can come in contact with food and get into the food and be a source of contamination. So specifically bandages, it's very important that if you do have a bandage that you are wearing a bright blue bandage in the kitchen, so that way if it does fall off into the food, you can easily identify it. And obviously if the bandage does come off in the food, that food needs to be discarded immediately. It cannot be consumed. Lastly, we have chemicals. So even chemicals that are used in the kitchen for cleaning purposes, they have to be stored properly away from the food or any food contact surfaces such as utensils and cutting boards, because we do not want to contaminate the food with any types of chemicals. Employee health. So it is the responsibility of the employee to report symptoms and diagnoses to your manager. Employees must report information about their health and activities as related to the diseases transmittable through food. So you need to report the date of onset of symptoms and illnesses, and also diagnoses that do not have symptoms. So reportable symptoms that you must report are vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, which is the yellowing of the skin or eyes, a sore throat with fever or fever in general, and then any lesions that are, have pus or boil as well, and infected wounds. So all of these symptoms must be reportable, reported to your manager, and it is likely that you will not then be able to work with food or around any type of food contact. Reportable diagnoses that you must report to your manager are Shigella, Salmonella, non-typhoid Salmonella, sugar toxin producing E. coli, hepatitis A, and norovirus. These viruses are transmittable from yourself to food and then to the consumer or the patient. So it's very important that you report any types of illnesses or diagnosis related to these. And personal cleanliness. So employees shall keep their hands and exposed portions of their arms clean. Hands and then up to your arms as well must be clean. The cleaning procedure for washing your hands must be done in a designated hand washing sink and must be done for at least 20 seconds. So first, step 1 is to rinse your hands under warm running water and then apply a soap or cleaning compound. Then for 20 seconds, rubbing your hands rigorously. So particularly paying attention to the underneath of the fingernails, in between your fingers, and then you want to do it in a way that creates friction on the surface of your hands and fingertips that really make sure that you get all the bacteria and grime off of your hands. So this is very important. And then after 20 seconds of that, you need to thoroughly rinse your hands under clean, warm, running water. Following this, immediately you want to dry your hands with a paper towel. You do not want to dry your hands with a cloth or your shirt or any other type of item like that, because that can produce contamination then again, and then you'll need to rewash your hands. So very important that you use a clean, dry, new paper towel to dry your hands thoroughly. When to wash your hands. So basically all the time, before you are beginning work, after changing gloves. So if you have a pair of gloves on and you take those gloves off for whatever reason you need to change them, if they're dirty, soiled, whatever, you put a new pair on. Before you put that new pair of gloves on, you must rewash your hands. In between touching raw animal food, so if you touch a chicken breast or any kind of raw animal food, you must wash your hands after touching that food before touching anything else. Any contact surfaces, any utensils, your hands must be washed to prevent contamination from that raw food item to any other surface or item. After using a tissue, so if you blow your nose for whatever reason or you use any kind of tissue around your face, you must wash your hands after doing so. After touching your clothing, hair, personal items such as a cell phone. So if you take your cell phone out of your pocket just for a brief second, even if it's just in your hand for 5 seconds, and you put it away, you have to wash your hands after that. So any kind of contact with your personal items, you must wash your hands afterwards. Anytime handling garbage, so if you take the trash out or touch the garbage can, must wash your hands after doing so. After touching a cut or sore on your skin, also very important to wash your hands afterwards. We do not want any of that bacteria to then be transmittable. And if you have touched a solid surface or come in contact with anything from outside of the kitchen, come back in, must wash your hands after touching any dirty surfaces, leaving the kitchen, coming back inside. And basically as much as possible. So this is a very important factor for reducing cross-contamination, and we want to protect the consumers from viruses as much as possible. Where to wash your hands. There are designated hand washing stations throughout the kitchen, and food employees shall wash their hands in a hand washing sink or approved automatic hand washing facility, and may not clean their hands in a sink that is used for preparing food, ware washing, or in a service that is used for cleaning of any disposable things such as filling up wash buckets and stuff like that. So very important that you only wash your hands in the designated hand washing sinks, and there should be signs around such as this one or similar to it that lets you know that this is what it is used for. So, clean conditions. Food employees shall wear clean outer clothing to prevent contamination of food, equipment, utensils, linens, and single-service and single-use articles. So, wearing an apron or any type of things like that to prevent your clothing from contaminating food. Eating, drinking, or using tobacco is prohibited within the kitchen, or unless it is a designated eating or drinking area. So eating and drinking can only be done in designated areas, away from the food, away from clean equipment, utensils, linens, and other things needing protection. So do not use drink or eat your food around other food items. Only do this in designated areas. Discharges from the nose, eyes, and mouth. Food employees experiencing persistent sneezing, coughing, or runny nose that causes discharge from the eyes, nose, or mouth may not work with exposed food or food equipment, utensils, linens, or unwrapped single-serve or single-use articles. We have bacteria and, every time we sneeze, cough, or runny noses, and we do not want to contaminate food or any equipment with our own bacteria. The use of bandages, finger cloths, and finger stalls. So as I mentioned earlier, bandages need to cover any kind of cuts or boils. And it is important that if you do have a Band-Aid on, or a finger clot, or a finger stall located on the hand, wrist, or finger, that a food employee must also be wearing a single-use glove. So anytime you have a bandage, you have to be wearing gloves. That bandage cannot come directly in contact with any food equipment, utensils, anything like that. Very important to wear gloves anytime you have a bandage covering. Hair restraints. Food employees shall wear hair restraints such as hats, hair coverings, or nets, and beard restraints. So if you do have a beard, you need to wear a restraint that covers your beard hair to make sure that no hair comes in contact with food, it accidentally comes out of your beard, falls onto the food, or even a hair net for keeping your hair out of the food. These are designed to be worn effectively to keep hair from contacting exposed food, clean equipment, utensils, linens, and unwrapped single-service and single-use articles. Nails and nail polish. Keeping your fingernails trimmed, filed, and maintained so the edges are cleanable and not rough. So having long fingernails and dealing with food or food equipment, there's bacteria underneath of your nails that you may not be able to see it. So we want to avoid having any type of long nails so we don't, harbor any bacteria. And unless you are wearing intact gloves that are in good repair, a food employee may not wear fingernail polish or artificial fingernails when working with exposed food. We do not want droppings of fingernail polish to come off or artificial nails to come off and come in contact with any food. Jewelry is a major harbor for microorganisms, so employees may not wear any jewelry except a plain ring such as a wedding band while preparing food. Employees may not wear any jewelry on their arms or hands, so bracelets or any other types of jewelry, other types of rings on our hands may not be worn when preparing food. So other ways to prevent contamination by employees, as I mentioned earlier, the very important techniques of hand washing is extremely important. Preventing contamination from hands. So except from washing fruits and vegetables, food employees may not contact exposed ready-to-eat foods with their bare hands. You must use the appropriate utensil. So for instance, if you're grabbing a piece of deli meat, you must use a deli tissue, a spatula, a tong, and be wearing a single-use glove or a dispensing equipment. So very important that you are not touching any ready-to-eat foods with your bare hands. Employees shall minimize the bare hand and arm contact with exposed food that is not in ready-to-eat food. So even food that is being cooked, you still do not want to be touching it with your bare hands. Always have gloves on and use a proper utensil to touch any food items. Preventing contamination when testing food. So if you are testing a food after preparing it, a food employee may not use a utensil more than once to taste the food that is being sold or served. So no double dipping whatsoever. If you use a plastic spoon to test the food, you must do it once and throw that spoon away. Or if you use a non-disposable utensil, you can only use it once. Do not use your fingers to touch the food. Only single-use utensil can be used. And packaged and unpackaged food separation, packaging, and segregation. Food shall be protected from cross-contamination by separating raw animal foods during storage, preparation, holding, and display from raw, ready-to-eat raw animal foods such as fish, sushi, shellfish, or other ready-to-eat foods such as fruits and vegetables. These must be separated from other food items because we do not want them to become contaminated with other raw foods that may harbor bacteria or viruses. Cooked ready-to-eat foods must also be separated from foods that can be a potential contamination risk. Fruits and vegetables must be washed. So before cutting up any fruits and vegetables, they must be washed ahead of time before utilizing those. And frozen, commercially processed, or packaged raw animal foods must be stored or displayed with or above frozen, commercially processed, and packaged ready-to-eat food items. Except when combining ingredients, separating types of raw animal foods from each other, such as beef, fish, lamb, pork, and poultry during storage, preparation, holding, and display by. So using a separate piece of equipment for each type of food. We do not want you to use the same utensil for a raw meat item that you may use for a raw poultry item, or any kind of fruits, vegetables, casseroles, any types of dishes. A separate utensil, separate storage for all of these different types of food. And foods must be arranged on the equipment so that cross-contamination from one is prevented unless they are being combined for a recipe. Preparing each type of food at different times or in a separate area. So, raw beef should not be prepared in the same area as raw chicken. And cleaning equipment and utensils in between use. So if you use a cutting board and a knife to cut beef, then you would want to clean and sanitize that entire area and utensil before utilizing that area and equipment for chicken, per se. And then cleaning sealed containers of food visible of soil before opening. So if you have a can and you're using a can opener to open it, making sure that you are cleaning that can off properly of any food residue or any debris that may be on that can that has, accumulated during storage. So always clean those food containers off before opening them. Food storage containers identified with the common name of food. So all containers must be labeled with that name of food. For instance, oils, flours, herbs, potato flakes, salt, spices, and sugar should be identified with the common name of the food. If these foods are put into large storing containers and separated from their original packaging, that container must have the name of the food. We do not want to be guessing what food item we are taking out. Washing fruits and vegetables. Raw fruits and vegetables shall be thoroughly washed before being cut. So if you take a pineapple out of the bin and you are about to cut it for to be consumed for someone, then you must wash that item before using it or before cutting it. And even if things are being combined with other ingredients, cooked, served, or offered for human consumption in ready-to-eat form, such as apples. So we want to always wash any types of food that are being consumed in ready-to-eat form. Preventing contamination from equipment, utensils, and linens. So food contact with equipment and utensils. Food shall only contact surfaces of equipment and utensils that are clean and sanitized. So do not put a piece of food on a cutting board that is dirty. Only a clean and sanitized cutting board can be used. Food should not come in contact with single-service or single-use articles such as linen or cloth napkins. These are not considered sanitized and clean items. And in-use utensils between use and storage. So utensils should be stored with the handle above the top of the food container, on a clean portion of food preparation table of cooking equipment, in running water, or in a clean protected location. So if you have a food item that is being used, such as a bin for flour, we do not want to keep the utensil that we use to take the flour out of that bin, and we do not want to keep that utensil in the bin with the flour, because the handle that you are touching could potentially be contaminated, and we do not want to contaminate the entire bin of flour. So utensils should not be stored in storage food bins. Linens and napkins, use limitation. Linens, such as clean napkins, may not be used in contact with food unless they are used to line a container for the food service, and linens and napkins are replaced each time the container is refilled for a new consumer. So again, linens or napkins should not be placed within the food. Wiping cloths, use and limitations. Cloths in use for wiping food spills shall be maintained dry. Cloths in use for wiping counters or other equipment surfaces shall be held between uses in a chemical solution at a designated concentration. So if you use a cloth to wipe down a surface or a countertop, when you are not using that cloth, it cannot remain on the table or the contact surface. It must be placed into the chemical solution so it can become sanitized. Cloths for wiping should be laundered daily as specified. And cloths in use for wiping surfaces in contact with raw food shall be kept separate from cloths used for other purposes. So if you have a cloth for wiping down a cutting board and sanitizing the cutting board, that same cloth cannot be used for, let's say, cleaning off of equipment of a refrigerator or inside the refrigerator. So separate cleaning cloths for raw food items that are used for other cleaning purposes. Draw wiping cloths and the chemical sanitizing solutions, which wet wiping cloths are held in between uses, should be free of food and debris and visible soil. So if you use a wiping cloth and it is, accumulated food and it is grimy looking and there's visible dirt and soil on it, it must be washed. And the containers of chemical sanitizing solutions with wet wiping cloth should be stored off of the floor. So we do not want to accidentally kick these bins of sanitizing solutions. They should be kept on a shelf that is away from food preparation and that does not potentially contaminate anything. Gloves. So their use limitations. Always wear gloves when you are touching or handling ready-to-eat foods, such as cheeses, salad greens, deli sandwiches, fruits, vegetables, and other cooked foods such as chicken tenders, roasted vegetables, and baked potatoes. So we do not want you touching any of these food items with your bare hands. You must wear gloves and use a utensil if necessary. Single-use gloves should be used for one task only. So if you are going from touching salad greens, we do not want you to go from touching salad greens to touching, a raw piece of meat and then back to salad greens. You have to take the gloves off, wash your hands, put a new pair of gloves on before going in between different types. And gloves should be discarded when damaged, soiled, or if you are interrupted. So if you are doing a task such as making a sandwich and then you get interrupted and have to go do something else, when you come back to the sandwich preparation, you must take off your gloves, wash your hands, and put on new gloves. Cloth gloves may not be used in direct contact with food unless that food is to be cooked, such as a frozen piece of meat. So if you are handling a frozen piece of meat with cloth gloves, that is the only time that cloth gloves can become in contact with food, because cloth, harbors bacteria and viruses, so we do not want to contaminate any food with that. And once again, hands must be washed before putting on gloves, changing gloves, etc. Food receiving and storage. So food must be inspected for safe transport and quality upon receipt. So when you are receiving food, it must be inspected, checking the boxes to make sure that there are no contaminations inside, making sure that the dates on that food are correct and the food is not spoiled, and keeping track of when to discard perishable foods, covering and labeling and dating all potentially hazardous food, time, temperature controlled for safety foods, stored in refrigerator or freezer. So these items must be labeled and dated with either the discard date or the use by date. They have to be labeled with the name of the food item and the date to which they are to be used or discarded. And food handling risks. Food left on trays or countertops beyond safe time temperature requirements must be discarded. So if a food is left out on the counter for longer than the safe time and it is no longer in the correct time temperature time frame, that food must be discarded. Any food that is left in the fridge beyond the use-by date must be discarded, or any food that is not labeled to begin with cannot be used, it must be discarded. So that's why labeling and dating the food is extremely important to make sure that we are within these safe parameters. Food stored in a manner such as open containers without cupboards, or food that is spilled over from one food to another is cross-contamination, and those foods must be discarded. So let's say in the refrigerator we have raw meat dripping that fell onto a casserole or any type of fruit or vegetable. That food that is contaminated must be thrown away. Any food that is in the refrigerator that does not have a plastic wrap or any type of cover must be thrown away. And then other food that must be thrown away is if it fails to maintain the refrigerated safe levels. So if the refrigerator is no longer working and the food has been sitting in there beyond the correct temperature, then that food must be discarded. Dry food storage. So dry food is stored in an area that is designed for storage of dry foods, such as single-service items, canned goods, packaged or containerized food items that are not PHF or TCS. So potentially hazardous foods, time, temperature-controlled safety foods. Clean, dry, controlled temperatures and humidity environments must be provided within the dry storage unit or the dry food storage. So we do not want it to be very humid in those food storage, because that can be an environment for bacteria. And the area must be dry, clean, so regularly sweeping and everything in there to make sure that the environment stays clean. And the packaging of food must be handled in a manner that protects the integrity of the packaging. So, dropping items on the floor and cracking the integrity of the packaging is not to be done, or any types of packaging that has been ill-handled and needs to be corrected. Food stored bins such as flour and sugar may be removed from their original packaging. So a bag of flour or a bag of sugar can be placed into larger food bins, so that way there are a larger amount of it available. But that bin must be labeled with that food item. We don't want random bins of ingredients and food to be unlabeled with what they are. Items must be kept 6 inches off of the floor on shelves. We do not want any food items on the floor directly. They must be clear of sprinklers, sewer waste, pipes, and vents. Pressurized beverage containers that are cased in waterproof containers such as bottles or cans and milk cartons and plastic crates may be stored on the floor only if that floor is clean and it is not exposed to floor moisture. So the basic practices of safe dry food storage are to manage the receipt and storage of food. So again, checking when you are receiving the food that it is in good integrity. Remove items from dry storage that are not safe for consumption. So let's say that a bag of flour has been contaminated by, let's say, a rat, for instance, has come in and chewed away at it. That food must be thrown away. Anything that is, broken sealed must be thrown away. And, food products must be kept dry in their enclosed containers, and then rotating supplies. So if you have food that has come in received, then you want to put the newest items in the back to be used last, and then the items to be used, the most frequent or next need to be in the front. Food storage is prohibited in areas such as locker rooms, toilet rooms, dressing rooms, in garbage rooms, in mechanical rooms. Food cannot be stored under sewer lines that are not shielded to intercept potential drips. Food is not to be stored under leaking water lines, including leaking automatic fire sprinklers heads and under lines which water is condensed. So no dripping water is to be contaminated, or food to be stored underneath of those areas. Food should not be stored under open stairwells or under any sources of contamination such as chemicals or cleaning supplies. Refrigerated storage. So potentially hazardous food or time temperature controlled for safety foods must be maintained at a temperature below 41 degrees Fahrenheit unless otherwise specified. Frozen foods must be maintained at a temperature that keeps that food item frozen solid. Inadequate temperature control can promote bacteria growth and be a hazard for foodborne illnesses, and the refrigerator must have proper air circulation within it. Foods in a walk-in refrigerator should be stored off of the ground at least 6 inches, so no food should be sitting on the ground of the refrigerator. Must be on a shelf 6 inches off of the ground. And the basic safe practices for refrigerated storage are to monitor the food temperatures and the function of the equipment at intervals. So routinely checking to make sure that the refrigerator or freezer is running and keeping the temperatures at the correct levels. So monitoring the temperature gauge in there frequently. Placing hot food in shallow containers to cool rapidly. So if you have food that needs to be cooled rapidly, it can be placed in shallow containers and stored in the refrigerator to speed up the cooling process. Separating raw foods. So beef, fish, lamb, pork, and poultry must be separated from each other within the refrigerator. And raw meats must be stored below fruits and vegetables or other ready-to-eat food items. So the order of storage: raw fruits and vegetables, other ready-to-eat foods, and then we have raw meats on the bottom. We do not want raw meats above fruits and vegetables because it can potentially contaminate those foods. And all food in the refrigerator or storage must be labeled and dated, labeled with what the food item is and the date of which the food should be discarded or used by. Safe food preparation. The steps to control and monitor in order to prevent foodborne illnesses are: identify potential hazards in the food preparation process and adhere to critical control points to reduce risk of food contamination and minimizing the risk. So anytime you see something that may be a risk of contamination, it should be addressed. And then when you're verifying food temperatures, you must use a thermometer that is both clean, sanitized, and calibrated to ensure the accuracy. So that thermometer must be calibrated correctly, so when you do measure a food temperature, it is accurate, and that same thermometer cannot be used from one food to another without being cleaned and sanitized. So for instance, if you are using a thermometer for raw meat, you cannot go from the raw meat, or even if it's a cooked meat item, you cannot go from that item to a potato salad, for instance. So that thermometer has to be cleaned and sanitized in between each food item. So ways to prevent cross-contamination. Store raw meats separately from one another in drip-proof containers. So beef, pork, lamb, poultry, and seafood may not be stored in the same containers. In between uses, store cloths used for wiping surfaces during the kitchen's daily operation in containers that are filled with sanitizing solutions at the appropriate concentration. So, cloths and towels that are used for cleaning may not be stored on the contact of, surfaces. They must be stored in the sanitizing solutions. And those solutions must be tested periodically to ensure that the concentration of the sanitization is proper. So we don't want concentrations that are below the recommendation specifications, because then they may not be sanitizing properly. And clean and sanitize work surfaces, including cutting boards, food contact equipment such as food processors, blenders, preparation tables, knife blades, and can openers in between use. So anytime you use a blender, we do not want to use that blender for two different items. They must be cleaned in between each item. Preparation tables, using a preparation tables to cut up meats, then it must be cleaned and sanitized before using that preparation table for vegetables or fruits per se. So the factors which may influence the growth of bacteria, potentially hazardous foods or PHF or time temperature controlled for safety foods such as TCS. These include ground beef, poultry, chicken, seafood, cut melon, pasteurized eggs, milk, yogurt, and cheese. So all of these food items, may be potential carriers of bacteria. So these food items are very important that we are handling them properly to prevent foodborne illness. And factors continued. So the acidity of the food also impacts the bacteria growth. So foods that are more acidic, such as pineapple, vinegar, and lemon juice, are protective from bacteria growth. The percentage of water that a food has also impacts bacteria. So foods that have a higher level of water, such as fruits and vegetables, are at an increased risk of bacteria growth, because bacteria needs water and moisture to thrive and grow. And time and temperature control. The longer the food remains in the danger zone. So the danger zone for food is 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So food that is left in this danger zone is at a greater risk for the growth of pathogens. So it's very important that we are taking the precautions to make sure that food is not within this time frame for very long, because bacteria multiply in a moist environment within the danger zone. So very important to be aware of this. And freezing does not kill bacteria. So the rapid death of most bacteria occurs at 165 degrees Fahrenheit or above, which is why foods need to be cooked to this temperature to kill off any bacteria. Thawing. Thawing in the refrigerator can be done in a drip-proof container in a manner that prevents cross-contamination. So if you have any frozen food, such as frozen chicken that needs to be thawed, it can be done in the refrigerator in a drip-proof container that is stored below any ready-to-eat food items. It can also be thawed in water, so that food item can be completely submerged underwater in a sink, an appropriate sink that the water is at a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit or below. And the water must be running fast enough to agitate and float off any loose particles. Thawing it in the microwave oven can only be done when cooking and serving it immediately after. So if you take it from the microwave to the oven, that is fine, but it must be done, immediately. And then you can also thaw it, as part of the continuous cooking process. Cooking. The final cooking temperatures are very important for preventing foodborne illness. And this is because cooking to proper temperatures kills dangerous organisms or inactivates them. So food should reach an internal temperature of the following: poultry and stuffed foods, so turkey, pork chops, chicken, all must be cooked to an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And all foods must be checked for the proper temperature using a thermometer. Ground meat, such as ground beef, ground pork, ground fish, and eggs that are held for service must be cooked to a temperature of 155 degrees or above. Again, checked using a thermometer. Fish and other non-ground meats must be cooked to an internal temperature of 145 degrees Fahrenheit. And fresh, frozen, or canned fruits and vegetables that are being used for hot holding must be kept at a temperature of 135 degrees Fahrenheit. So, cooking continued. Microwaved food items. Foods that are microwaved must be rotated and stirred continually during the process So let's say you're microwaving something for 5 minutes. Every couple of minutes you want to stop the microwave, stir it, rotate the foods, and then put it back into the microwave. This is to ensure that all parts of that food all equal a temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And then that food can be allowed to stand covered for at least 2 minutes after cooking to obtain temperature equilibrium. And reheating foods. Reheating foods must be cooked to reach an internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. Cooling. So cooling of improper cooling is a major risk factor for causing foodborne illnesses. So large or dense foods such as roasts, turkey, soups, stews, and legumes or chili may require additional interventions for cooling. So, such as placing food in shallow pans to increase the amount of space that food has, and so it's not all in one small container, basically creating more surface area. Cutting roasts into smaller portions. So if you have a big roast, you do not want to leave it in the whole form. You want to cut it into small portions so it can cool more easily. And then utilizing ice baths. So utilizing ice baths to cool that food item faster, and then stirring periodically. So if you have a food item in a big, large, shallow pan, you want to stir it continually to move that food around and to cool faster. Tightly covered hot food containers may reduce the cooling rate, so the cooling rate may be slower if that food is covered. Traps moisture and the heat in. And this could lead to longer cooling times in which the food remains in that danger zone. So remember that danger zone is from 41 degrees Fahrenheit to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. So cooked potentially hazardous foods subject to time temperature control for safety are best cooled rapidly within 2 hours from the temperature of 135 degrees to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and within 4 hours to the temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit. The total time for cooking from 135 degrees to 41 degrees Fahrenheit should not exceed 6 hours. Freezing. So parasite destruction can be done with freezing, but not bacteria. So parasite only will be killed during the freezing process. In order to do so, raw marinated, partially cooked, or marinated, partially cooked fish shall be frozen and stored at a temperature of -4 degrees Fahrenheit or below for a minimum of 168 hours or 7 days. So this is how long it takes in that temperature for parasites to be killed. Or it can be frozen at -31 degrees Fahrenheit or below until solid and stored at -31 degrees Fahrenheit or below for a minimum of 15 hours. The food can be frozen at -31 degrees Fahrenheit or until solid and stored at -4 degrees Fahrenheit or below for a minimum of 24 hours. Time and temperature control. Time and temperature control for safety food, hot and cold holding. So, foods shall be maintained at 135 degrees Fahrenheit or above, at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or less. So again, that time control safety. We do not want foods sitting in a temperature of 41 degrees to 135 degrees because this is the danger zone for bacteria and pathogen growth. Eggs must be stored in a refrigerator equipment of 45 degrees or less. So eggs cannot sit out on the counter. They must be refrigerated in a temperature of 45 degrees or less. Ready to eat, time temperature control for safety food, date marking. So refrigerated, ready to eat food items prepared and held in an establishment for more than 24 hours must be marked to indicate the day or day by which the food shall be consumed, sold, or discarded. These foods, particularly for foods that are held at a temperature of 41 degrees or less for 7 days. So all food that is time temperature control for safety must be dated and marked correctly. Food labeling, which I just touched on. Commercially processed food, open and hold cold food must be dated with the date or day by which the food shall be consumed, sold, or discarded. So examples of these food items include deli meats, cheeses, yogurts, chicken salad, egg salad, pasta salad, macaroni and cheese, and dairy products. All must be dated with the date and when to be consumed, sold, or discarded. Ready to eat, time temperature control for safety. Food disposition food shall be discarded if it exceeds the time and temperature combination. If the food is in a container that does not have a date or a day, so if the food is unmarked, then that food is not able to be consumed and must be discarded. Or if the food is inappropriately marked with a date or day that exceeds the temperature and time combination. So if the food should have been consumed the day prior and it is now the day after, then that food may not be used, it must be thrown away. Food service and distribution. Food safety requires consistent temperature control from the tray line to transport and distribution to prevent contamination. The covering of food items. So food items that are being transported cannot be uncovered. They must be covered to prevent contamination. Food preparation or food service area problems and risks to avoid. So using a steam table to heat food cannot be done. The steam table can only be used to keep food warm and may not be used to cook food. Food must already be completely cooked before utilizing the steam table. And we do not want to hold food in the danger temperatures of 41 degrees to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. And we do not want to use soiled or dirty utensils and dishware. So any soiled or dirty utensils and dishware, equipment must be cleaned before utilizing. And we do not want to handle food with our bare hands. Remember, always wear a glove and use serving utensils. Food distribution and service. Foods on the tray line should be monitored periodically throughout the meal service, checking for proper hot and cold holding temperatures. So we do not want foods to be, not checked and potentially in that dangerous temperature area and then be a potential food hazard. Foods held in improper temperatures must be discarded. So if you check a food item and it is not within the time temperature control parameters, it must be discarded. Staff distributing trays must first wash their hands properly, very important. And you also must wash your hands after collecting soiled plates and food waste. Prohibited reservice of food. Food may not be reserved under the following conditions. Any food served to patients or clients who are under contact precautions in medical isolation or quarantine or protective environment isolation. Returned food and reservice of food. Food that is unused or returned by a consumer may not be offered as food for human consumption. If a container of food is not time temperature control safety, may be reserved from one consumer or another. If the food dispensed so that it was protected from contamination and the container is closed between uses, such as bottles of ketchup, steak sauce, etc. These can be used from person to person. And then foods such as crackers, salt, and pepper, if they are unopened in the original containers or packaged and they are maintained in sound condition, they may be reutilized. So that concludes that PowerPoint. Now we will be moving on to cleaning, sanitizing, and pest and rodent control. So the cleaning of equipment and utensils, I know I've touched on some of this previously, but I'm going to get a little bit more in depth about the cleaning of surfaces, of food contact surfaces, non-food contact surfaces, and utensils. So equipment that is in contact with food, surfaces, and utensils should be clean to sight and touch. So if you see a surface of a cutting board or any food surface that is dirty, it must be cleaned to touch before using it. The food contact surfaces of cooking equipment and pan shall be free of encrusted grease deposits and other soil accumulations. Non-food contact surfaces of equipment shall be kept free of accumulation of dust, dirt, food residue, and other debris. So any food that, even if it's not in contact with food, must be kept clean. So how to clean and when to sanitize and clean. So the following steps. First step, to scrape or remove food bits from the surface using the correct cleaning tools such as a brush, pad, or cleaning cloth. Second step is to wash the surface. So prepare the cleaning solution with an approved cleaner. Wash the surface with the correct cleaning tools such as a cloth towel. And then third, we want to rinse the surface. So using clean water to rinse the surface with the correct cleaning tools such as a clean cloth. Fourth, the surface needs to be sanitized using a correct sanitizing solution, and that solution must be prepared per the correct concentration per the manufacturer requirements. So the concentration of the sanitizing solution has to be within the proper parameters. And the correct tool must be used, such as a cloth towel, to sanitize the surface. And making sure that the entire surface has come in contact with the sanitizing solution. So if you have a large surface, we don't just want to clean one area that may have been used for preparing food. The entire surface must be sanitized. And then fourth or fifth, you want to allow that surface to air dry. We do not want to use even if it's a dry cloth, we do not want to use a dry cloth to wipe the surface down, because that cloth could be contaminated, and then we would recontaminate the surface again. So making sure that we allow the surface to air dry completely. Equipment and utensil cleaning. So pre-cleaning. Food debris on the equipment and utensils should be scraped over a waste disposal unit or garbage receptacle, or shall be removed in a ware-washing machine with the pre-wash cycle. So if necessary for effective cleaning, utensils and equipment shall be pre-flushed, pre-soaked, and scrubbed with abrasives. We want to remove all food debris from that food item during the pre-cleaning process, because we don't want to wash it if there's still food debris on it. The loading of soiled items in ware-washing machines. Soiled items are to be cleaned in a ware-washing machine and shall be loaded into racks, trays, or baskets onto the conveyors. Machine washing and sanitizing. Dishwashing machines either use a heat or chemical sanitizing solution or method. Ones that use a heat sanitization, high temperature dishwasher. The wash cycle must be at a temperature of 150 degrees to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And the final rinse cycle must be at a temperature of 180 degrees Fahrenheit or above. A low temperature dishwasher that uses a chemical sanitization method, the wash temperature should be at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and the final rinse must be at 50 ppm, which is parts per million, hydrochloride, chlorine on the dish surface as a final rinse. Manual washing and sanitization. So this is a 3-step process, including wash, rinse, and sanitize. So the first step of washing is hot water and detergent after food particles have been scraped off. So scrape off food particles, and then that item is ready to be washed. The second step is rinsing. So you want to rinse with hot water to remove all of the soap residue. We don't want soap residue going from that equipment or utensil into the sanitizing solution, because then the sanitizing won't work properly. So it must be rinsed free of all soap residue, and any food particles must also be removed. So that equipment must be, completely clear of any soap or residue. And the third step is sanitizing with hot water or the chemical solution with the correct concentration. So that sanitizing solution must be tested periodically to make sure that the concentration is correct. Dishes and utensils must be immersed in hot water in the sanitizing solution. That is 171 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 seconds. So you cannot just dip a utensil or an item into that sanitizing solution. It has to remain in there for 30 seconds. Or if you are using a chemical solution according to the manufacturer's instructions. So whatever manufacturer's instructions say. Equipment and utensils, air drying is required. So after cleaning and sanitizing equipment and utensils, these items must be air dried or used after adequate draining. Equipment and utensils should not be dried with a towel, as this may increase the risk of cross-contamination. So if you have a food equipment item such as a utensil or a plate, you may not use a hand-dry towel to dry it clean because that cloth may be contaminated, and so we want all of these items to be air dried only. So the steps for cleaning. So first step, equipment and utensils are used. They become soiled. The equipment and utensils are soiled with food or other debris. So then we need to go to the washing cycle. The third step is pre-flushing and pre-soaking. So to remove any food debris that has been encrusted on, it needs to be pre-soaked to make sure it's thoroughly off. And then the fourth step is washing. So we have this 3-compartment sink. We already went through the washing cycle, so we wash it, and then we rinse it in the rinse sink to remove all of the soap residue. And then the fifth step is sanitizing. So either keeping that food or that food item equipment in the sanitizing solution for 30 seconds so that it is completely sanitized. And then sixth step is air drying. Again, we want that item to be air dried and not wiped clean with a cloth. And then seventh, after it is air dried, it must be stored properly. So it needs to be put away in the proper area so that way it is free from contamination, and then it can be reused. When cleaning fixed equipment, so fixed equipment such as mixers, slicers, and other equipment that cannot be readily immersed in water, the steps for this are to remove all removable parts, and those are to be washed and sanitized. And non-removable parts should be cleaned with a detergent and hot water, rinsed, air dried, and sprayed with a sanitizing solution. Equipment should be reassembled, and any food contact surfaces that may have been contaminated during the process are re-sanitized. Surface wiping cloths are cleaned and dried or placed in a chemical cleaning solution. So again, we do not want to keep cloths out in the open on food contact surfaces. They must be properly put away or kept in a chemical sanitizing solution. Kitchen floors. Cleaning and sanitizing the kitchen floors is one of the most important jobs to complete. So floors often accumulate very quickly with dirt due to the hustle and bustle of foot traffic, fallen food, and equipment grease. So floors become very dirty very quickly in the kitchen. So improper cleaning of the floors leads to first a food buildup. This food buildup will then can cause bacterial growth and foodborne illnesses. And the food buildup also can attract vermin and pests and rats. So we do not want to, we want those floors to be nice and clean. The proper cleaning involves sweeping and reaching underneath of all equipment. So under tables and other equipment, you have to reach underneath of it. And then the floors need to be washed with a heavy-duty cleaning solution. Floors must be cleaned at the end of each night. So at a bare minimum, they must be cleaned at the end of each day. Laundering. Clean linens shall be free from food residue and other soiling matter. So the specifications for laundering: linens that do not come in direct contact with food shall be laundered between operations if they become wet, sticky, or visibly soiled. Cloth gloves should be laundered before being used with different types of raw animal food, such as beef, fish, lamb, pork, and poultry. So I mentioned before that if you use a cloth glove to handle frozen meat that is raw, you can use that, but it cannot be used from, one piece of frozen beef and then be used for a frozen piece of poultry. It must be laundered in between uses. Linens and cloth napkins shall be laundered between each use. Wet wiping cloths should be laundered daily. So any white wiping cloths that are used to clean must be cleaned daily, cannot be used for the next day. Dry wiping cloths shall be laundered as necessary to prevent contamination of food and clean serving utensils. Prohibitions: cleaned and sanitized equipment, utensils, laundered linens, and single-use articles may not be stored in locker rooms, in toilet rooms, garbage rooms, mechanical rooms, under sewer lines that are not shielded to intercept potential drips, under leaking water lines, including leaking automatic fire sprinkler heads, and under lines in which water has condensed. They also may not be used under open stairwells or near any other sources of contamination. Preventing contamination: kitchenware and tableware must be cleaned, and sanitized utensils shall be handled, displayed, and dispensed so that contamination of food and lip contact surfaces is prevented. Knives, forks, spoons that are not pre-wrapped shall be presented so that only the handles are to be touched by employees. So any knives, forks, and spoons must be wrapped at the heads of it, so that way, those parts are not being touched by employees, only the handles are. Preset tableware. Tableware that is preset shall be protected from contamination by being wrapped, covered, or inverted. And sponges. Sponges may not be used in contact with clean or sanitized in-use food contact surfaces. So sponges are they hold on to bacteria and other viruses, so they cannot be used to come in contact with any clean and sanitized surfaces. Receptacles. Receptacles and waste handling units for refuse, recyclables, and returnables shall be thoroughly cleaned in a way that does not contaminate food, equipment, utensil, linens, or single-service and single-use articles. Soiled receptacles and waste handling units for refuse, recyclables, and returnables shall be cleaned at a frequency necessary to prevent them from developing a buildup of soil or becoming attractants for insects and rodents. So remember, insects and rodents, will eat anything, any kind of waste. So keeping these units clean is very important for preventing any kind of buildup of bacteria or attracting insects and rodents. Poisonous or toxic materials. Identifying information on the premises. So containers of poisonous or toxic materials and personal care items shall bear a legible manufacturer's label. So any types of poisonous or toxic materials must have the manufacturer's label on it. If not, it must be discarded. The common name. So the working containers used for storing poisonous or toxic materials such as cleaners and sanitizer taken from bulk supplies shall be clearly and individually identified with the common name of the material. So same thing with labeling food bins. All containers with poisonous or toxic materials such as cleaners and sanitizers must have the common name of the material. We don't want a guessing game of what that cleaning solution or sanitizer is. Separation. So poisonous or toxic material shall be stored so that they cannot contaminate food, equipment, utensils, linens, and single-service and single-use articles by First, separating the poisonous or toxic materials by spacing and partitioning, and locating the poisonous or toxic materials in a way that is not above food, equipment, utensils, or dishware and linens. So any poisonous materials cannot be stored above or anywhere near any food, equipment, or utensils, because we do not want to contaminate any of these surfaces with possible toxins. And poisonous or toxic material containers, a container that was previously used to store poisonous or toxic materials may not be used to store, transport, or dispense food. So an old container that had a cleaning solution in it cannot be used to store any food at all. Chemicals for washing, treatment, storage, and processing fruits and vegetables criteria. So chemicals that are used to wash or peel raw fruits, whole fruits, and vegetables, or used in the treatment of storage and processing of fruits and vegetables must be an approved food additive listed for intended use, and it must be generally recognized as safe, also known as GRAS, for this intended use. So, do not use any unapproved cleaning solutions for fruit and vegetable to do so. Medicines. Medicines and restriction and storage. Only those medicines that are necessary for the health of employees shall be allowed in the food establishment. Medicines that are in a food establishment for the employees shall be labeled as specified and located to prevent the contamination of food, equipment, and utensils. So keeping medicines on our personnel is a no-no. We do not want to keep any medicines around the kitchen. They must be stored properly. First aid supplies storage. First aid supplies that are in a food establishment for employees shall be labeled as specified, and they must be stored in a kit or container that is located to prevent the contamination of food, equipment, and utensils and linens. So any first aid supplies cannot be just out and about around the kitchen. It has to be stored properly in a container and located in the area that prevents contamination to food items or food equipment. Pest and rodent control. So now we're going to move on to pest and rodent control. The most common pests and rodents are ants, bed bugs, cockroaches, flies, house mouse, roof rat, and sewer rat. So I will get into some of these pests and rodents. First off, the ways of entry that pests and rodents can come into the kitchen or establishment are frequently open doors. So, doors are opened frequently from the outside in, and bugs and other creatures and rodents can easily come inside. Through the delivery of supplies and food. So, these creatures love to live in boxes that are nice, warm, and dry areas and have food. So we must check the supplies of food as it comes in to check for any signs of rodents or bug infestations. To properly do this, it is important that we are checking the food upon delivery and that food storage and food preparation is done correctly, because these are all important factors for reducing rodent and pest activity. So again, storing food in closed, tight containers so that they are not open, and then when preparing food, cleaning up after any food preparation. We don't want food just sitting around on the ground or on the countertops, that this may attract insects and pests. So the associated diseases with rodent and pest infestations are the hantavirus, leptospirus, plague, rat bite fever, salmonella, E. coli, and typhus. So these are all diseases that can be transmittable to humans. Cockroaches. Many of you should know what cockroaches are. They are those bugs. They can range anywhere from this big to, this big. And they are resilient pets, so they are pretty durable when it comes to trying to get rid of them. And they develop large infestations quickly, so they do nest a lot of eggs and have a lot of offspring, so can rapidly become a huge infestation problem. Roaches are carrier for bacteria such as E. coli and salmonella. And these bacteria can be very harmful to those with compromised immune systems. They can also trigger allergen and allergic reactions. Cockroaches hide in dark cracks and voids, and they are transported into buildings via shipments and delivery. So again, hiding in food that is being delivered to the food establishment is one way that cockroaches can come into the building. So upon delivery of food, we want to check those food items to check for any signs of infestations. Flies contaminate food and packaging materials, and they can potentially spread foodborne illnesses. They enter buildings through open windows, doors, cracks, and small openings, and they thrive in trash receptacles and drains. So it's very important that we are keeping the trash cans clean, and so that they do not have any residue in the bottom of them, and then emptying the trash regularly and cleaning them to make sure that flies are not attracted to it. A fly infestation is very hard to control because they, just like cockroaches, multiply very rapidly, so they are difficult to control. So preventing them in the first place is step one. The signs of pest infestations. So egg casings. From hatching and laying eggs, you will have the remnants of the egg casings anywhere. And if you spot one or more of these pests, that is a sign that there is an infestation. The droppings, so the droppings from these pests look like pepper or ground coffee appearance. So if you see, these, especially in dark corners or in the bottom of shipping food packages, that is definitely a sign that there is a pest infestation. And then if you see, several dead pests as well, so after they die, their remnants remain there. If you see, several of these, and that is a sign of pest infestation. So the control methods and prevention of pest infestation are to keep doors, windows, and cracks sealed. So having open windows or any cracks in the windows or foundation is definitely an area where pests can enter the establishment. And secondly, checking food delivery and storage for pest remnants. So always checking food delivery upon receipt to check for, the droppings, egg casings, and for the pests in general. And proper cleaning. So proper cleaning is a great method to control pest infestation. So cleaning up spills immediately. If something spills, on the ground or, down the side of a container or anything like that, it should be cleaned up immediately. We do not want to leave food residue or any type of residue remain, because that will attract pests. And frequent mopping. Greasy areas are to be wiped clean frequently. Tightly sealed food containers. So food containers that are in either dry storage or refrigerated storage must be sealed completely. We do not want any open containers because that will attract pests. Removing crumbs from tables, floors, counters, and storage. So again, we do not want to leave any food items or crumbs on the ground, floors, or counters, because this will attract pests. And then emptying the trash regularly. So not having a whole bunch of trash build up with food in it. Making sure that every night, at a bare minimum, the trash is taken out. House mouse has it is short, half the size of a typical rat, and more delicate features. So you can identify a house mouse as soft gray or brown fur with white underbelly, and it is known for their dark whiskers. The average body length of a house mouse is between 3 to 4 inches, and it has an equal length tail. Mouses create their nests made from shredded paper and other fibrous materials, and they often, carry this musky odor. Mice can be seen during the daylight hours, and they typically eat cereals, grains, or basically anything. So dry storage is definitely an area in which mice can contaminate because they like to eat on these dry foods. And they typically nibble on food. So maybe a container that the seal has been broken, you'll see little infestations of it, or maybe it could be inside the food container. Mice are excellent climbers as well. So to look out for mice infestation, you'd want to look for the droppings, any flesh, gnawing, or tracks to indicate recent activity locations. So because they do nibble, they may gnaw through parts of wood or any other type of material. And then if they have been climbing all around and they have oil on them, you may see their tracks. So this can be an indication of recent active locations. Rats carry diseases such as bubonic plague and typhus, which can become an epidemic and very deadly to humans. So rats are very big harbor of bacteria and diseases. Their lifespan is between 2 to 5 years. They dig deep and long burrows to nest. They are more aggressive and will attack humans. They are very adaptive to their environment, so they can learn to survive in different types of environments. And they will often leave oily stains on the walls and openings. And you can spot a rat dropping if it's about a ½ inch in diameter. So this will separate a rat dropping from a mouse or other type of pest. Roof rats, also known as the black rat. They are dark brown in color, and their average length is between 13 to 18 inches from nose to tail. So roof rats are fairly large. Their tails are longer than their bodies, and they have large ears. They typically nest in trees, wood piles, garbage, plants, or inside tight places such as attics. And they also coexist with sewer rats. They are good climbers, and they can fit through an entrance the size of a quarter. So, imagine a long rat that is, more than a foot long, but it can fit through a opening like this size. So they can get into very small places. Roof rats can have up to 8 litters per year and bearing 6 to 8 rats at a time. So this is a large amount of rats that are being produced every year. They are most active 1 hour after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise. They primarily consume fruit and nuts, but they will typically eat anything just like most other rats. And they are typically food hoarders, so they may take food and store it for later use. And you can tell if a root rat is present in a food establishment because they may hollow out citrus fruits and trees on the ground, but they could do this in the food establishment as well. Sewer rats, also known as Norway rats, they weigh between 12 to 16 ounces and are about 6 to 8 inches in length. They have a blunt nose with ears and eyes, or with small ears and eyes. They have shaggy and coarse fur with variations in color, so they could be anywhere from brown to white to black, gray. So their fur is very different colors. Their tail is scaly, and their tail is shorter than the head and the body combined. Sewer rats live in close association with people. They burrow to make nests under buildings and other structures, beneath concrete slabs, along stream banks, ponds, garbage dumps, and other locations with food, water, and shelter. So a food establishment is a perfect nesting ground for sewer rats. They are present in urban and suburban areas, in and around residences, cellars, warehouses, stores, slaughterhouses, docks, and sewers. So again, a food establishment is a great place for a sewer rat to make its nest. They can climb and typically habitat in the lower floors. They are primarily nocturnal, and they are most active at dusk, when they are seeking food and water. So the 7 signs of pest control. So we have the dead casings, number 1. Number 2, droppings or any other type of debris from them. Number three is droppings. Number 4 is the gnawing at wood. Same thing with 5. 6 is any type of oil that is, been spread around, and then 7 is the presence of egg casings. So droppings and urine stains in feed areas you can look out for. Dark grease stains from rats or fur on pipes, shelves, and around entrance holes, and then the tail and footmark prints in debris, dust, and nestings will also be present. Rodent control methods. So to ensure the control of rodents, you want to ensure that doors and windows fit tightly and are screened. So windows that are open should not be opened freely. They need to have a screen that is protecting the outside environment from the inside. And close all holes or gaps through walls with heavy gauge steel wood, galvanized metals or steel mesh or hardware, and tightly seal openings around pipes and wires. Also reducing trash buildup. Discarding appliances and junk, so we do not want trash to build up in the food establishment, be left overnight, because this is a great area for when rodents will come and go through the trash and create their nests. So lumber needs to be stored 12 inches off the ground. We do not want pests or rodents to become infested in the lumber, and they are attracted to that. And garbage must be kept in tightly covered metal or heavy plastic containers. So no large garbage with food in it should be kept open and exposed to the air, because we want to keep it nice and tight and close to prevent infestations. So other preventions of infestations are to really routinely inspect incoming shipments or food and supplies. So every time we get a delivery of food, those shipments must be checked for any type of infestations. And then just routinely inspecting the premises, so checking dry food storage areas for casings or droppings, or any kind of dead pests must be checked regularly. And then eliminating any harborage conditions that would attract them. Lastly, using approved pesticides. Pesticides from home may not be brought in to kill any of these rodents or vermin. Only approved pesticides used from the establishment can be used. Rodent bait shall be contained, covered, tampered, and bait resistant. A powder pesticide may not be used in a food establishment. So a powder pesticide is toxic to food and consumption. So if we use a powder pesticide and it's on the ground, and then it can easily become transmittable through food and contact surfaces. So powder may not be used. If used, a non-toxic tracking powder such as talcum or flour may not contaminate food equipment, utensils, linen, and single-service and single-use articles. So for survival, pests and rodents need food, water, shelter, and warmth. So do not provide it. Keeping a clean environment is extremely important for reducing pest and rodent infestations. So next we will go over some review questions. You will see the questions, and I will give you a couple minutes to answer the questions before going over the answer. So question number 1, bacteria, viruses, toxins, and spores are what type of contamination? A, physical contamination, B, biological contamination, or C, chemical contamination. I will give you a minute to think of your answer. Okay. The answer is B, biological contamination. So bacteria, viruses, toxins, and spores are a source of biological contamination. Remember, physical contamination is, metal shavings, any type of personal item, so a fingernail or a bandage, that is a physical contamination. And chemical contamination is, a cleaning solution or any type of chemicals that are become transmittable through food or equipment. Second question, what is the minimal amount of time for proper hand washing? A, 1 minute, B, 5 seconds, C, 30 seconds, or D, 20 seconds. And I will give you a minute to think of your answer. Okay, the answer is D, 20 seconds. This is the minimal amount of time for proper hand washing. Remember, first step, rinsing your hands with water, and then you want to wash vigorously with soap for 20 seconds in between cracks and in between your hands, underneath your fingernails for 20 seconds, and then rinsing your hands under warm water again, and then once you finish that, drying your hands with a clean paper towel, not a cloth. Okay, question number 3. What food is not a potentially hazardous food or time temperature controlled for safety food? A, beef, B, milk, C, eggs, or D, dried oats? Which food is not a potentially hazardous food? I'll give you a minute. Okay. Okay, so D is the answer. Dried oats are not a potentially hazardous food item or time temperature control food item. But beef, milk, and eggs all need to be cooked to the proper temperatures, and they cannot be held in a time temperature zone of 41 to 140 degrees, as this is a harbor for bacteria and toxin growth. So 4, what is the danger temperatures for holding food? A, 33 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 41 to 135 degrees Fahrenheit, 75 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, or D, 135 degrees to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll give you a minute. Okay, answer B. The danger temperatures for holding food are between 41 degrees and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Question number 5. 3 major risk factors for causing a foodborne illnesses are A. Poor personal hygiene, overcooking food, improper holding temperatures, B. Inadequate cooking times, food from unsafe sources, clean and sanitized equipment, or C. Contaminated equipment, inadequate cooking, or poor personal hygiene. What are 3 major risk factors for causing a foodborne illness? Okay, answer C. Contaminated equipment, inadequate cooking, and poor personal hygiene are 3 major risk factors for causing foodborne illness. So, in answer A, we have poor personal hygiene, that is a risk factor, and improper holding temperatures, but overcooking food is not a cause of a foodborne illness. Answer B was incorrect. Inadequate cooking times is a risk factor. Food from unsafe sources is a risk factor, but using clean and sanitized equipment is not a risk factor. So the 3 major risk factors for foodborne illness are contaminated equipment, inadequate cooking, and poor personal hygiene. Question number 6. What are the 3 steps of the washing cycle in order? So answer A, wash, rinse, sanitize. B, sanitize, rinse, wash. C, wash, rinse, dry. Or D, sanitize, rinse, and dry. I'll give you a minute. Okay, answer. The answer is A. The 3 steps in the washing cycle in order are wash, rinse, sanitize. Question number 7. True or false? Dishes and utensils can be dried with a clean cloth. I'll give you a minute. False. Items must be air dried to prevent cross-contamination. So drying any dishes or utensils or contact surfaces with a cloth, that cloth could potentially be contaminated, and then if we were to use that cloth to dry any dishes or utensils, we would be recontaminating those items. So only air dried can be used to dry items. Question number 8. Reducing pest and rodent infestations can be done by A. Proper food delivery, B. Proper food storage, and C. Proper food preparation, or D. All of the above. I'll give you a minute. Okay, answer D, all of the above. Reducing pest and rodent infestations can be done by checking the food delivery as it is delivered to make sure there are no signs of pests or rodents, and properly storing food so there's no open containers of food to be contaminated. And then proper food preparation, so cleaning up after any spills and messes, things like that can all reduce rodent and pest infestations. Question number 9, true or false? Pests and rodents can carry diseases that can cause illness to humans. Now I'll give you a minute. Okay, true. Yes, pests and rodents can carry diseases that cause illness to humans, so E. coli, salmonella, flu, things like that. And last question, number 10. Floors should be cleaned how often in the food establishment? A, once a week, B, once every other day, and C, before inspections, or D, at the end of each day. I will give you a minute. D, the answer is at the end of each day. Floors must be swept underneath of equipment and then sanitized using a cleaning solution at the end of every single day. That concludes this presentation. Thank you very much. Have a great day.